Welcome to Teaching Artist Podcast, a show dedicated to discussions of teaching art to kids, making art, and how those things overlap and feed each other. I'm Rebecca Potzaguirre, your host, an artist and educator. Anthony Berdis shared his story of finding refuge and courage in art. He talked about imagining a queer space and how he creates that imagined space. He also spoke about the idea of being a parallel player alongside his young students and his continual work to move away from facilitator or director in the classroom. I loved hearing about his process and all the research behind his work. I also loved how he is able to incorporate play and whimsy among all the references and context that goes into his work. If you can, take a look at his work while you listen. As a queer maker, Eric Anthony Berdis from Erie, Pennsylvania, continuously finds ways to imagine and embody joy through his practice. Navigating the new normal as an elementary school teacher and studio artist, he finds himself working in the hours from 5 to 11 p.m. in his studio. His work embraces a maximalist aesthetic of archival research, personal secrets, and pubescent gay boy glamour. Entering their installation, the audience is transported to a new world. Thrift store castoffs and hobbyist craft supplies are reassembled into a cast of characters that blur the lines between ghost, creature, and friend. For Eric, the studio becomes a haven in periods of instability, insecurity, and oppression. Happiness, play, and pleasure are not only sought after during difficult times, but are arguably necessary components of survival. Joy is an act of resilience, a critical method of subverting hegemonic narratives of suffering. Queer joy in Eric's work is found through forms of exuberance, such as world building, materials, and escaping into new types of textile processes like quilting. Eric is a teacher of preschoolers. In his classroom, he tries to become a parallel and collaborative player in his students' activities, hoping to not only build a deeper connection to students, but also support their development in a way that is true to their interests. They have received their MFA from Virginia Commonwealth University. Eric has exhibited work at the University Galleries of Illinois State University, Stay Home Gallery in Paris, Tennessee, and Bunker Projects in Pittsburgh. His work has been published in Hiss Mag, Emergency Index, and American Painting. Let's hear from Eric. I am talking today with Eric Anthony Berdis, and I'm excited to hear more about your artwork, your teaching, where and whether they kind of come together. And I like to start with just sort of your background, if you could kind of walk us through how you got into both things.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be a part of this. Hi, my name's Eric. My students call me Mr. B, and I kind of have like this long meandering road of battling with like, am I an artist? Am I a teacher? What am I? Like, I'm queer. Oh, I haven't found myself. Like, I don't see a lot of queer teachers. Like, I can't be a teacher. They're going to call me a pervert. Like, oh, this negative thing happened to me. And I shut down and went into hid my artwork. And then through that, like, got a lot of bravery. And anyway, so my grandmother was an art teacher. And when I was born, she was just kind of, grandma to me. And it was one of my like favorite places to go was grandma's house. She lived 2 blocks away with my grandfather and their, beautiful brick house. And they had this like closet of art supplies that she just kind of like had. And this was, before like video games and phones, obviously, but it was just kind of like this space to draw and experiment with things. And sometimes she would show me something. I remember she showed me shading, like how to shade, which was like super exciting. And she also kind of showed me how to like sketch something out before you like made a defiant mark on a drawing. So like getting your proportions correctly for like a person. But that was kind of my main introduction to art, was this time at grandma's house that I have a twin brother that we both worked with and kind of like would work next to each other, and like this parallel play, building our own worlds, drawing our own things. Occasionally, very rarely, but occasionally like drawing something on someone else's paper and then responding to that. But like, the surrealist, but we didn't think we were doing that. We didn't know we were, but yeah, that was my main introduction to art. And I loved art from elementary school to middle school to being in high school. Like, it was just something that I really loved to do. And I was like always interested in other things. I never was like great at them, but like I did them. Like I ran track and cross country, and I was in the musicals and stuff like that. And I think some of the theater things like play into my performance practice, but I was never really good at math or anything like that. So like art was just kind of like the natural thing that I gravitated towards like choosing my career, wanting to go to college and things like that. I went to Westminster College, and this is just like long-winded, but they didn't really have an art program. And so I will also back up and say my twin brother and I were like friends, but I was like, I needed to make my own, define my own self. And, I was coming out, I was becoming queer, figuring myself out. And I just really wanted to figure myself out, not in a school that was like close to my community. So I was like, no one's going to Westminster College. And so they have an art program, I'm going there. And so that just was a time for me to, like to make out with boys and get drunk and like, and, like also be in an art program, but it really wasn't the right fit. So I decided to transfer to Slippery Rock University, which is in Western Pennsylvania. And it had a small but mighty art education program. But their degree was you get a BFA and then you get teacher certification. So you had to go to Pittsburgh to get at a smaller private university to pay for the teaching certification. And Slippery Rock was a state school, so it was affordable, cheap. And I was like, I don't want to pay for that. So I found an AmeriCorps program and I moved to Philadelphia, and I was in the process of like being thought I was going to be like doing more art. Like I was like, oh, I'm going to be an art teacher. And then they were like, surprise, you're a 7th grade reading teacher.
Good
and yeah. So I found myself teaching myself how to teach reading and drawing in my sketchbook. I like moved to Philadelphia with literally nothing. I was like putting things in storage at my parents' house and taking like a shoebox of art supplies and like reading up on how to teach reading. And it was like a wild time, but it was also one of those spaces where I was young and not as confident as I think I am now. And my understanding of like race dynamic was way different. I was the only white like leader in the classroom and teaching middle school. And I was obviously queer presenting, like my voice doesn't sound masculine. Like I am not like a football player or like, stocky build. So I didn't project masculinity. And so I found myself getting called faggot every day. I found myself, like a parent bringing a baseball bat to school. And like, it was just like not the experience that I saw myself in for the rest of my life. And it was very stressful. And I started to build, strategy, and like, it was like not their fault that they like had this phobia. That took a lot of consciousness, I think, for myself. And I started this saying that I was like, hey, I just want to let you know, when you use the word faggot, it creates an unsafe space for people that identify as, whatever, gay, lesbian, transgender, queer. Like, it's just not a nice word. So I'm just going to ask that you not use that word around me anymore. Thank you. And that was kind of how I would address that issue. And, throughout the year, my kids would accidentally say it. It would just slip, and I would just stop what I was doing and go, hey, like, we're just not going to use that language anymore. You messed up, but don't use that word around me anymore. Thank you. And they got to the point of some of them being like, I know, Mr. B. Like, it was obviously that time, that mental space. I did what anyone was going to do. I applied for my MFA and I didn't get in anywhere. I had a portfolio from my undergrad that I was like trying, that was like 2 years old. And I was trying to like figure that out. But I did get an opportunity at Temple University in their fiber program to do a post-bac. I was very interested in material, and I was very excited about material and this potential that like cloth and any flexible thing could be. And I was also really fascinated with, queer history and like queer theory and putting it together with a faculty named Jessie Harrod, who was kind of just like my queer parent who just like gave me a chance. And I spent the year doing this post-bac and, getting confidence and exploring performance and costume and lots of sequins and like lots of pageantry and thinking about the Coquettes and Lee Bowery and all of these like queer history, like 1960s, 70s, before I was born, 80s, like 90s performance art, and trying to like channel that into my work. And it kind of created this really flamboyant, gimp mask wearing superhero that I would just call like the friend of gender equality. And my first performance was taking a gimp mask and like 7 bananas and dressing from my, everyday clothes to this pervert self in some way, eating the bananas while saying, I just want to let you know, when you use the word faggot, it creates an unsafe space for people that identify as gay, lesbian, transgender, queer. I'm going to ask that you not use that word around me anymore. Thank you. And as I'm eating these 7 bananas, it's like, oh my God, how many is he going to eat? How many is he going to say? And that was kind of my like entry into performance art. And like, I think the work that I kind of have and the world that I've just started building to imagine a queer space for myself, for my students, and for other queer people to think as a utopia. But obviously, utopias are not all things. So there's obviously some parts of the play that is a dystopic world. And that started to feed into my confidence. I was seeing myself as the artist, but I needed a job, but I was really good with kids. And I started teaching on the side and like doing long-term sub gigs. And yeah, that was kind of how I found myself working with younger audiences. And then I was subbing, I was doing great things, I was making art, and I decided to apply for grad school again. And I ended up getting into VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, in their fiber program to work with Erin McIntosh, who was a queer mentor and was also a part of the Queer Threads exhibition that Jessie Harrod was in. And it just kind of felt like a legacy that I wanted my work was speaking to at the time. I think still does. And then next thing I know, I graduated in 2020 and the pandemic hit, and my job prospects of like teaching at a university or whatever is like in the toilet. And I was like, well, I'm really good at teaching children. And I had moved home. My parents they work in hospital, but I call them the quiet heroes. My mom works in a cafeteria and my stepdad is a transport. And so they were, working overtime and all this stress. Right. And so I came home to help them as well as like to kind of reset and figure things out. And my elementary school in the district that I went to was hiring emergency certified teachers to teach reading because
you're like, I've done that.
I've done that. And so I started teaching kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade reading. And that was how it kind of all started. And I'm currently, I love being an artist. I think it's, it'll never change, but I decided to go back to school to get my certification in preschool to 4th grade because I love art. I think it's amazing, but there's something about teaching the younger students and having a homeroom class that I'm stellar at. I can do it and I'm great at it. And my work, I think, really fuels off like engaging with younger audiences. And I constantly am thinking about ways to connect them in multiple ways. But I think being in the classroom and being a queer teacher in the classroom for students is where I thrive and where I can, I think some of the best performance art is when I'm in front of 16 kindergartners for the day. And you're like, this audience, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. It is such a performance.
Yeah. Like you have to be animated. You have to be, I think you have to be flamboyant in some ways. Like you can't read a story and say the three little pigs crossed the, no, they're gonna be like, they're gonna be so bored. And so I think that that's where I'm feeling my calling. And I think a lot of my work has started to reflect that in a lot of ways. And yeah, we can talk about it more. But that's my journey.
So much in there. Thank you for sharing all of it. One thing that really stood out to me was you called it, I think, stressful when you were teaching in Philadelphia and, hearing this word over and over again. And I wrote down, like, I think that's traumatic. I don't know that that's just stressful. Like, that's a little more intense than just stressful.
Totally.
And you said something about like you hid within your artwork, which was really beautiful in a way to me, that it felt like, and I might just be putting words in your mouth, but it felt like you kind of went there first and then kind of built up this sort of bravery. I think it took a lot of bravery to start responding in the way that you did, saying, that's not okay. Like, please stop doing that. And then that became part of your work too. And it sounds like that first performance piece was just super powerful.
Yeah, I definitely was like a shift in my practice. Like, I think I've always been like a two-dimensional space maker, but I think performance was a way to just get into the real, like get into 3D and explore other elements that I have started to think about in my practice now, like in installation and in video and with the props and garments and things like that are a part of my portfolio.
Yeah. And then do you ever display those, like you have a performance and then would you display those props and garments as well?
Yes, I do have my website. Earlier work, I made a series of hobby horses that I felt like the gender equality would need a trusty sidekick in a part of the work. And so the hobby horse kind of became this way of, how do I say this? It just kind of became this like tool in some way of fantasy play and making, but also like it's a hyper-phallic object. And there's like something that's so like ridiculous about it. And so these hobby horses were then used to invite people to race on. and I was hand sequining everything and using remnant fabric to just kind of make these. And there were some other objects that were around the room as like zines and other plush toys. And this was the first iteration of play and then this photo was me kind of being the ringleader. It was all about me at this moment, but people were from the audience. They didn't know they were going to participate, but I would like, coyly pull them in and then they raced. And that work had gone on to be another few things. And again, I like to keep it a safe space. And so I'm like in my underwear and very vulnerable. And and again, this is like all in artist run spaces. Part of that was, I was like, oh, I have two lives. I was like, I have this art version of myself, and then I have this teacher version of myself. I have to keep private. And I think that was also a weird time to figure out. And I have like, obviously, I mean, I'm 32, I've matured, I've gained more confidence. And so when like administration go, I found your website, I just go, yeah, I'm very busy. Or I make a joke like, yeah, it's all in storage. I have everything. I have everything if you want to buy something. I always make a joke like that. And, that's usually how it ends. Like I never have. And I think the times have changed. I think people are more out at work. And I think there's queerness everywhere. And I think the culture is more accepting, even in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is great. But yeah, that's.
Yeah. I was going to ask whether you share any of your work with students or if you talk about your sort of like, I'm an artist and do you talk about that side of your work? I feel like I'm sure especially with the younger kids that you have now, you probably can't share everything.
No,
but
yeah. I will
like,
say,
are there aspects that you do?
Yeah, I will say in 2020, 20, I was, supposed to graduate, and there was like all of this unknown about the world. And so my thesis show was put on pause, and the work that I was creating in, my very exciting studio was locked and shut down, and I couldn't even access it because we had to leave early. And so my life changed. I was teaching kindergarten. I was reading with first graders. And so I told them, I was like, I wanted you to be a part of this project with me. I have to have an art show. I'm an artist. And so they couldn't go to the show. It was in Richmond and they live in Erie, but I could share with them photos, and, I could make a space, and we could plan the space together. And so this was kind of in response to what their work was. And this was called It's Going to Feel Like Wednesday All Day. And this exhibition was a collaboration with two partner teacher friends. They're actually sisters, Carissa Caith and Corinne Caith. Her now last name is Stewart. But I worked really closely with their classes, and they had made these like really amazing penguins, and the penguins were all so unique and had their own little personality. And I said, I really want to do something with your penguins. Can I put them in my art show? And I was like, well, they just can't be penguins. They have to be something special. And then they were like, cheerleaders. So I found these like old cheerleading costumes from the family showcase, and it's on usually around Mother's Day. But it was a Mother's Day play that I was in. I mean, this had been passed down from when I was in kindergarten.
Wow.
I wasn't a cheerleader, but I remember the costumes, and they were I just borrowed all these things. And a lot of the work that I was thinking about at the gallery was like things that could return to the school, or like things that were part of the lesson. And so I created all these flowers that after the exhibition went back to Iroquois and were just put up places given to teachers, just as like these little moments that went out. And we were on winter break. We went virtual for 2 weeks. So the new year was our first time back into the building after a month. So I was like, we need to do something for the kids. Like, we have to do something. And so I painted all of these signs that just said, we missed you, welcome back, good morning 2021, like, you look taller, are those new shoes, just like these other really funny things. We missed you, welcome back. And just really filled the school with these like hand painted signs that were just on, white backdrop paper or whatever, like you use for bulletin boards. And we got out the pom-poms from the Mother's Day parade, and we like we power greeted all the kids into the building.
I love it.
And so, that was just like something that I experimented with and did to, introduce my students to the work. And that had an end goal. Like they were a part of the work from the beginning, and whether it was me thinking about them or them actually being a part of it, like trying to create a joy for the students to do was. And there's a lot of things in this space, but all 32 kids' artwork, a piece that they made, was included into the show. That was one way that I included the students recently. In terms of like my actual teaching, I don't necessarily bring it up often, but I do often talk about quilting or something when it pertains to a lesson. I like to include, I think I like the material element into my kids' learning to build fine motor. Sewing is a great way to build fine motor for kids, and especially when they're still developing. So that's kind of how I think about work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And you teach, I feel like those younger ages are so much fun. They're so open, and so like, there's so much creativity there. I'm always taking pictures of my daughter's artwork, and I'm like, oh, that needs to be a giant painting. That's just the colors, the composition. Somehow there's something they do that's just incredible.
Completely. And I in my classroom, I don't necessarily I don't often go, we're going to make a penguin. Like, we're going to make this, because I don't want to limit their creativity. So oftentimes I'll just put out supplies in like a semi-organized fashion on a table, and I just let them do what they want to do. And their investment into the work is, I think, far beyond what I could do with this is a penguin.
Exactly.
And I mean, I totally respect both ends, and I think these ones, like, I just loved their personality, and sometimes there's stories that the students made with the penguins was special. They all gave them names. They all told me like what they like to eat. And I mean, this was a part of a lesson about penguins. So they, made their own, like the framing of the lesson was, I mean, different, but in terms of like play-based art, I let them go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That, I always think about it as that the child is the artist. So letting them be the artist, letting them have the ideas and experience all of what it means to be an artist, that it's not just like following instructions. It's figuring out, okay, I've got these materials. Like, what do I do with these materials?
Yeah. And I, as a teacher, I mean, I feel like I often am, because of like the nature of my classroom, like I often am acting as the facilitator, or like, I hate to be the referee, but sometimes you got to be the referee. But I really love when I get to be the parallel player, or like someone that's at the table with them and just doing my own thing, and just being a comfortable presence next to them and letting them figure it out, if that makes sense. And that is something I'm still working on as a teacher. I think I'm not perfect at it. And I'm like, my New Year's resolution is to get out of the referee, get out of the
like facilitator.
I forgot that word. And leader, and get more into the parallel player, to just be in a space with my kids, to have them work comfortably, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love that term. I don't know that I've heard that before, parallel player, but that makes so much sense. And I like that way of terming it, that you're playing alongside them the same way they are. And there's so much learning that comes from playing. Yeah. Beautiful. And then we've talked a lot about some of the work that you've created, but I'm curious about your process. Is there a lot of play involved? What is your sort of process like? And is it different for like the textile work versus the performance work?
Yes, I will say I am currently in my life, I'm like responding to projects and exhibitions. And so I have deadlines. Which I'm very grateful for. Like, I'm super excited. These are big things in my career. And, I'm teaching. I'm like, I can do both. And I'm very committed. And so in aspects of play in my work, I haven't done a lot of the things that I wish I would have been able to do when I was in grad school. I feel like I try to mimic, in grad school, I was like really trying to mimic the way my kids play. And like, I'm on the ground, I'm sitting on my belly, I'm drawing on my belly, and was trying to like really master that world building and kind of think about that space. But now I'm really into like the technical, like nitty gritty of, I need flowers. Like, I need to sew and make 500 flowers. So I'm going to sit in front of Grey's Anatomy, and I'm going to sew and work. And I I experiment, and I put sequins on one, and I go, ooh, I like that color scheme. I'm going to do that 15 more times until I run out of fabric. And so it's very different, and a very different type of play. But I think about that as like a way to figure things out and teach myself and experiment. And I'm very lucky. Like, I live in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is, not a art capital. And so rent is very affordable. And so my studio space is very large. And so I can have a drawing space, and I can have a sewing space, and I can leave my my hand sewing space. And then I can leave my sewing machine up and just like move back and do that. And so that's been very fortunate to do. And then I'm very lucky because I can leave most of my schoolwork at school. Like, I don't have to take it home with me. Occasionally I do, which is another work-life balance I think I still try to figure out. But like, I'm in the studio. It's 5 o'clock. I've taken a shower. I'm in my comfy clothes and I'm going to just work until 10. And that's like that's project mode.
Yeah.
Like, I would love to get back to play and things and like more experimenting. And I try to do that with like dyeing cloth or like tie-dyeing cloth. And that's kind of like where I get more experimental. Like I'm like, I need blue fabric. And I'm like, ooh, I can just go buy blue dye.
Make some.
Yeah, let's make some. And so that's kind of a space where I do experiment and have fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a balance between like production mode and play and having time to experiment. And it's always interesting to hear how other artists handle that. Like I've heard some people, it's like production. And then maybe there's like a residency that gives you that time and space for experimentation. Or there's like a self-imposed summer residency. Just, okay, I'm not teaching. I'm going to take time and like do my play.
Totally.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear too, how you're balancing that time.
I feel like I'm just in the hustle. Like I'm like, we gotta go. Like I picked up some McDonald's. That's going to be dinner. And I'm going to I'm going to burn it off when I'm running around my room.
Yeah. Making those 500 flowers.
Yeah. I mean, some things when you're sequencing, like you have to have a plan, you have to focus. But I think some things arranging and there's play. There's obviously a lot of play in my work that comes to get out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then I'm curious too, how you find opportunities. Is it like, are you at the point now where people are kind of coming to you and saying, we want you to be in this show, like, here's your deadline? Are you still seeking out a lot of opportunities? What's that like?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like I'm very fortunate. I had an exhibition at Illinois State University, which was a huge opportunity. And I thank my friend and curator, Jess Bingham, who she runs an artist-run space called Project 1612 in Peoria, Illinois. And that space, I had not met her. I applied to their show and drove my hobby horses, and we did the hobby horse races together. And she had just had her daughter. Her daughter's like turning, I think her daughter's 4 now. And it's like such a beautiful thing. But she had just had her daughter, and she was like, she was pregnant when the open call was. And she told me, she was like, I want to have my daughter so we can both ride a hobby horse together. And that was special. And so when she was thinking of an exhibition for my work, like she was thinking of exhibition, she thought of me first, which is really special. And it was just kind of like that show was in response to the safe zone training that a lot of universities took on, that kind of trickled down to high schools and, now elementary schools. But thinking about queer youth and providing them a safe teacher to be for them to be out to. And it was right in the time of Matthew Shepard's murder. And if you don't know, Matthew Shepard was a boy in Wyoming, and he was walking home and he was gay bashed and found dead, or almost dead, and then was pronounced dead in the hospital. But that legacy of like queerness coming out of this like ghost was a really meaningful and like powerful thing that I was thinking about a lot in my work, thinking about like Lee Bowery and the Cockettes and these other queer history icons that we lost to during the AIDS crisis, and other queer artists and individuals like Keith Haring. And so that idea of what would a queer ghost look like, and what would their clothes be? And I was like, and I went back to thinking like a child, and I was like, what would a queer ghost look like? I don't think they would be a white cotton bedsheet that we see at Halloween time. And like, I think they would be more full of life, more colorful. And that kind of had me thinking about the work that I mostly have been focusing on the last year, thinking about the AIDS memorial quilt and these other like extravagant performances, and kind of like assembling and creating these very large, either 6 feet tall ghosts that I call ghost, but these are like quilted and pieced forms. And the heaviness of them, I feel, kind of like thinks about this in a way that their clothes drag on the floor in a similar pageantry that a drag queen may have with their garments. And there's this warmth and life in the work, but there's also this sadness. And so on many of the ghosts, there's an Afghan blanket that was, and this just literally came out of play. Like I'm working on these quilts and I bought all these Afghan blankets and I was like, I'm going to cut smiley faces into them. And when they were hanging in my studio, they were smiley faces. But the second I draped one over the form, it kind of became this sag. And I was immediately like triggered to the A.A. Bronson's piece of Felix Parts. It's a very large billboard portrait of his friend and comrade and artist collective member, and I believe lover. I'm not 100% sure on that right now, but he took care of Felix when he was dying of AIDS, and the day he died, he took his photograph when he's his gaunt, when you die, your face, it relaxes after all this time, and it's like this moment of peace. And so the drape of this smiley face kind of becomes relaxed in a scream or some way. And so that was a powerful discovery of play in my studio that I just was like, I need to run with this for a while and figure it out and parse it out. And that nonlinearity, as you can imagine me in this interview, like there's a lot of nonlinear jumping points, is like throughout my practice of like, we're here. And I hope that there's a thread that connects them together. But for me, I sometimes don't need it. Like, I'm like, this is just going to be here and this needs to be here right now. And if you get it, that's great. But if you don't get it, it just can be this offshoot thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think they do all tie together. Like the ideas are so rich and those do tie together. I see throughout your work, and then like aesthetically, just the colors and the sort of textures that you're working with. Yeah, these faces are incredible in there. And that combination of like you were talking about, the sort of heaviness and like this, somehow it's sad and happy at the same time, which connects so much to what you are also talking about. Yeah, really, really powerful work. And I found your work through Stay Home Gallery, which has some of your work in a show right now. I don't know if you'd want to talk about that work and that show. We were talking a little bit before we started recording.
So yeah, again, that's like another thing. I follow a lot of places on Instagram. I feel like sometimes that maybe ages me, but I find that Instagram is the best tool for an artist to have. It sets reminders for me. I'm like, ooh, this show's coming up. This show's something to apply to on the 15th of January. It's the 9th of January. I have 5 days. I'm going to put that on my calendar. Like, I love and respect that about Instagram. And I think that was one way that I do seek opportunities, and mostly they're out of artist-run spaces. And I was a member of an artist-run space in Philadelphia for many years called Little Berlin. I believe because of the pandemic, it's now closed, but being a member of, and also I think a lot of my research comes out of thinking about collectivity, like artists-run spaces and the power that kind of creates, and this synergy of ideas and modes and all of these things fueling together to create a common goal. And I think that's a beautiful thing Stay Home Gallery has, is like their energy and their power to create art opportunities for emerging artists like myself to be at is something that I want to speak to and I want to support. And so I'm like, and it was like, oh, they're queer. That's another great thing. That's powerful. That's a greatly aligned with my practice. So I was like, even if they don't accept me, I'm like, they can have my money. Like that was like, they can have my application money. Like I feel good and confident about applying to this because it's a part of my mission as a person. Because as you know, us teachers don't make a lot of money to be applying for a lot of shows. And so I feel very strategic about the ones that I apply to, at least right now.
Yeah.
Because you can't make art when you're worried about toothpaste. Like you can't apply for shows when you're worried about toothpaste. And so that work is a lot smaller. It was my studio shrunk significantly. And I was just thinking about, well, I started to do research along, like, again, thinking about queer history. There's an abandoned practice called Polari, which was out of England and kind of was this like, I like to think about it as a child's like pig Latin or a way of communicating, but it's this like secret coded language that if I were to speak to someone who was also queer and knew the language, we could have a secret conversation, whether it was to like sleep with each other, or like have sex, casual sex, or just find community in each other, or like find a laugh in someone's outfit, or share gossip in some way. And it was a way for individuals to like evade police or undercover cops, or, you know, someone who they might think is queer but is actually straight, and, you know, prevent them from getting gay bashed. And it was just this way to be safe. And, you know, because of technology, it just became an outdated mode of technology. But there is a wonderful app that you can download called Polari, and it has a lot of this lingo and things. But that type of gibberish and symbols of how things are created was a launching point for me to just think about like the imagery of these quilts that I was working on. And so I titled them all English words. Like, I think part of me is still trying to suss out and really investigate that type of language. I think learning a new language is better when you speak it. And I don't have anyone to speak it to. So it's like, you know, it's a slow roll.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, I feel like there's a lot going on in my life. So but that part of me is just thinking about these symbols that might be gibberish to an like, or a visual like explosion, but is actually like tells a story and in some way. And these early quilts were a way to kind of like think about that, as well as build the technical aspect of the work, because I find myself being a very sloppy maker, and
I relate to that.
And I am always wanting to like, you know, build my technique, but just so it could be more effective and easier. But oftentimes I'm like, this just has to, like, and I think sometimes in the DIY art scene, like, I'm like, this just has to stay up for one night. Like, this just has to stand for 48 hours and then it's in the garbage. Or it becomes a code again. I don't know. You know, it's like you find that you have to figure these things out. And I love that. That's what I love about Artists from Spaces. And I like of this raw DIY thing. So I try to bring that into my genuine art making, but there's also value and richness in doing it right the first time.
Right.
And so that was an experiment to learn how to quilt, teach myself, do it right, not in a rush. Like there wasn't much of a deadline for the work, but it was a way to experiment and teach myself other sequencing technique and other embellishment technique, and explore applique and these other methods that I think are rooted in queer protest and POC protest, but I had not had a chance to do. So it was another way to learn that and honor that tradition.
Yeah, beautiful. And you just mentioned sort of this, like, I want to say intersectionality, this sort of like overlap between queer protest and protest for Black lives, or, you know, other sort of protests like I'm thinking of like Cesar Chavez, you know, back in the day. I'm curious if any of that comes in, and especially just thinking back to that experience you had when you went to Philadelphia, and a lot of it was traumatic, but you also talked about being the one white person there. Like, what was, how did that change you? Does that like come into your work? And do you find overlap there in thinking about these sort of overlapping social justice issues?
Yeah, I do. I often, if there's something I don't know, I try to go back to where it is, or if maybe if I'm lacking information, like I'm like, where is this word come from? Where does this technique actually come from? Because like I didn't make it up. I don't think that like this person that's a blog poster, or when I Googled it, actually made it up. Like, where does it root from? And I think with a lot of textile rich things, like oftentimes there's a lineage that I have spent and I continue to try to do, is like, where's the source, and how can I honor the source of that person, of that community or like space, and how can I represent that, if that makes sense? And how do I continue to educate myself and my language and to better my teaching, but also like if I'm going to teach something in my classroom, where does that etymology of that word come from? Or like how do I can I like bring that into something else and like not just know it up here, but like know it here and in my work and in my practice. And I think that's an evolving thing because I think language changes so often. And I mean, if you were to call me a faggot 10 years ago, I think I maybe would have like, you know, shuddered. But now I'm just like, hey girl, like, you know, like, hey, like, you know, like it's just this. And I think that often happens with queer. Like, I think there's a generation that still like shudders from that word. But, you know, it's like a lot of my generation embraces that language, but it's like still being honored of the individuals who maybe don't. And, you know, respecting pronouns and two-spirit identities and other things that they of the language that they choose, and being intentional about that, if that answers that question.
Yeah, I think so. I love that idea of kind of going back to the root of things and continuing to learn as well. Like we're, you know, always learning, unlearning, figuring it out, trying to do better. And then I like to kind of start to wrap up with a question I feel like you've actually maybe talked a lot about, but I like to ask people, what are you curious about? I feel like this is going to open like a giant web of things for you. I'm curious about everything.
I mean, I definitely am. I definitely am curious about a lot of things, but I'm very fascinated with child development and like the science that goes with teaching. I think there's so many disconnects that are there, and I understand that, like, you know, children develop at a different rate. And I mean, I don't have a child, so I have not got to experience the joy of like raising someone from, you know, here to being 6, or I get to experience them when they are 4 in my classroom. And I feel like I'm very focused on building that gross motor development and like really seeing that fine motor development and like embracing those cognitive, emotional spaces for students and really celebrating those things. And I try to bring the science into my teaching. And I think that's one thing that I mentioned, but I like thinking about kids, you know, benefit more from play than they do direct instruction. Like they could hear me talk all day, but play is this space of where they're learning and being their own version of an artist or engineer or scientist or writer or mail deliverer, and they're learning, they're gaining more experience that way. And so I am just curious more teaching myself and finding ways to just improve that in my classroom and in my teaching. And I don't know how that aspect of it'll end up in my work, but I know it'll go there somewhere.
Yeah. It's like it all comes back around, and even if it's not obvious, like it feeds into what you're doing. And that is so important to think about with our students, and just keep learning, keep improving. It is so cool as a parent too, to see that growth, but also to see it in students. I had almost 2 years where we were virtual. I wasn't really seeing my students. And then I came back in the fall and I was like, you're like 2 feet taller. And how are you? Like, you know, the last time I saw you, you were a little tiny 2nd grader, and now you're like 4th grade. What's happening? Just seeing that growth too. And then seeing how their personalities keep changing. All of it is really, really amazing as a teacher.
Yeah. And there's something about like the unbridled joy that when they've achieved something that was unexpected, because I think sometimes, like, you know, that brain development, their brain is growing so fast and so much. And like, it's like they nailed that K sound. Oh my gosh. And you're like, I'm shaking. I'm so happy. And I think that is, I maybe it'll never get old. Or like when they learn to read, like I had a student learn to read, or they were struggling with reading. And then one day after school, their dad went to pick them up and they were like, Dad, I want to read you this story. And the whole time I was like, oh no, what's going to happen? And his dad mentioned to me, he was like, that's the first book you read to me. And I was like, ooh, I was a puddle in the corner, but it was this moment that I'll never forget. And I think I was like, this is where I need to be in the classroom. And so I'm very fascinated with child development.
Yeah, beautiful. Another just kind of fun, silly question. What is your favorite food?
I listened to the other podcast and I was like, I need to find a favorite food because I won't have one. But I love coffee. Like it's not a food, but I love coffee. But to answer the food question, yes, cheers.
Cheers.
To answer the food question, I like, there's something about like little salt and pepper on watermelon on like a summer day that I'm just like, I could eat this all day. So I like salt and pepper on my watermelon.
Ooh, I have to try that now.
Yeah. Some people like it with just salt, but I think like a coarse pepper, little coarse pepper just makes it a little smoky. You might be like, Eric, this is disgusting, but
no, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, I really have to try that. I might end up saying it's not good, but we'll see.
This summer when you figure it out,
yeah. I'll have to come back to you and be like, all right, good recommendation, or maybe not so much. And then is there anybody that you'd want to give sort of like a shout out or thank you?
My Slippery Rock painting professor, Heather Hurdle, is one of my cheerleaders and is just a dear friend and has just been like a huge support since I not only graduated, but when I was in school. And I just feel like I have to mention them. She's just an amazing mom and artist and professor, and just really helped me think about the creativity of like thinking about children early on in my career. Even it was like we were talking about painting and she was like, this is a great thing to do with your kids. Or like when we talked about enthusiasm of being a flamboyant, excited teacher, she's that with her college students. And I think that's a spirit that I carry in my art practice and my teaching practice, is that joy and excitement. So yeah, I just have to say her.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I'm reading now Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. And that was a big part of like one of my sort of takeaways so far has been that idea that excitement, learning being fun, not being relegated to the elementary classroom, that like it should be fun even at the university level. It should be exciting and like enjoyable at all levels. And, why do we so often kind of look down on play at the university level? Yeah.
Thank you. I have to add that to my list.
Yeah,
I actually haven't.
I know. I'm like, I have a giant reading list.
Yeah. I usually listen, if I can get it on Audible, like if I can listen to it in the car, it helps. But then I find myself like having to go back and be like, oh, I need to highlight that. Like, oh, I need to.
Right.
You buy it on Audible and you also buy the book, so you can like
both.
You have both, but
yeah, I'm the same way. I need the visual. I guess totally. We're artists. We're visual people. And then last thing, where can people connect with you online?
My Instagram is my name, at Eric Anthony Berdis. You can find me probably in a tag at the Stay Home Gallery post. And yeah, look out for exciting things happening in 2022 and 2023, which I'm excited to share. But
yes, awesome. Yeah. Do you have any that you can share now that you want to like?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm having an exhibition at Kutztown University, which is in Pennsylvania, and it's in correlation with their art education conference. And I'm their artist in residence that will be having an exhibition during the conference. And so it's like a major solo show for me. And a lot of the work that I've spoken about this entire time is going to be revealed at that show. And so that will be in October of 2023. Smaller, I'm getting back into painting. I'm designing some murals for a school in Erie, and I'm excited to work with their community and students to brighten up the school with some murals and engaging with another conference, an education conference, but like 250 volunteers will be painting the murals that we design and that I design. And so I've been working with the school and members of the conference organization team and ways to bring joy into children's lives. And a lot of Erie schools are in person. And so, but the buildings, they need a fresh coat of paint. And so this is exciting to be able to not only work with students on their own murals and things like that, but also their space and bringing them joy. So that's been, it's a lot, but it's good. It's good. So I'm excited to share that.
That's so exciting. Congrats on the upcoming big solo show and then murals. A lot of work, definitely.
Yeah.
But that's awesome.
Thank you.
Exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Yeah. So, and my Instagram it's the art, it's the dog, it's the the cool things my kids make and my students make. And it's a lot of the lake. I really love Lake Erie. I love being around water. And so it's all of everything.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I've struggled I don't have a personal Instagram. It's just kind of all in one place. But having multiple for like podcasts versus art, even that is tricky. Again, it's like the double life thing. Like I couldn't do it anymore. It was like, I just have to be. It's all in one.
It's
you're a whole person.
I'm a whole person. You get the art, you get the puppy, you get the teaching. You don't like it.
Get it all.
Too bad.
And the lake.
And the lake.
Love it. Thank you so much, Eric.
It's nice to meet you.
I will share your links as well. So everybody check the show notes, go check out all of his incredible work. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this, for sharing with us.
Yeah. It's great meeting you.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can reach me at Teaching Artist Podcast on Instagram or teachingartistpodcast@gmail.com. Who do you want to hear from? Please share your recommendations of teaching artists. And if you loved this episode, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow me. It really makes a big difference. Thank you.